Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest Top 5 episode. This is the show where I count down top 5 of some topic in progressive rock or music, just doing it off the top of my head. My wife usually generates the topics. I've been doing this for the last few months on the channel. It's been getting a fairly good reception, so I'm really happy about that. This is probably going to be the last Top 5 of the year. I do these every Tuesday. I'm thinking about moving it actually to every Thursday coming into the new year, but I'm going to do a show explaining the scheduling and things like that. So there'll probably be a couple weeks off of Top 5, but it will resume and return with a lot of cool, interesting topics. My wife is always creative and coming up with some really cool, interesting ideas. Lately, I've been doing some top 5s that are related to the end of the year type stuff, and this is no exception. I'm doing an end of year type list here of the top 5 Prog Headlines of 2022. I do a weekly show called New Music Weekly where I do the top Prog Headlines of the week every week. I do those on Fridays, and it's a lot of fun. And this is sort of a recap show for the top headlines that I talked about on there, and assembling the top 5, or at least generic categories that I could put into this list of the big things that happened in Prague this year, at least from my perspective, from the perspective hopefully of a lot of you that follow my channel and know the types of bands that I'm really a big fan of and follow very closely with the news items from them. So getting into my list, let's jump right into it. At item number 5, Transatlantic possibly calling it a day and performing their final concert is my number 5 item. So this is a little bit of bittersweet news. Transatlantic went on a tour earlier this year, started in the US, and then they also did a stint in Europe as well. And they talked a lot about, towards the tail end of that tour, how this could be their final time touring together and that this could be their final concert together. And so this is their last show ever was in Paris on their Absolute Universe tour that took place about in the summertime this year, I believe. I talked about it and covered it on New Music Friday on July 30th. So it was around that time where they performed their last ever concert, potentially. They talked a lot, Mike Portnoy talked about in social media about how this is possibly the last concert they'll do, and they just announced a new live release for this actual event concert that they did, and they're calling it the Final Flight live at Olympia. And so the wording of that, of calling it Final Flight, seems to also indicate that this could be the last concert, the last thing that the band will do together, which is really unfortunate for big Transatlantic fans like me. So it was really newsworthy because they're a big supergroup of prog that I think a lot of people follow and are interested in, and to know that they may be hanging up their hats and calling it a day is pretty big news. But we'll see how that proceeds in the future. Will they resume in some fashion, like 10 years down the line, some massive reunion of sorts? It's hard to say, but we'll see. Number 4 Prog headline is basically all of the news surrounding Big Big Train, them honoring the loss of David Longdon earlier this year, and their posthumous releases with David Longdon, which were Welcome to the Planet, and of course David Longdon's solo album, Door 1, and then ushering in their new singer, Alberto Bravin from PFM fame. That was big news this year, in my opinion. A lot of people were waiting with bated breath to see how they would continue with the band after this really untimely passing of David Longdon, who was such a central, important figure in the band. Really irreplaceable in a lot of ways, but it's exciting in some ways that they're continuing forward. They have a lot going on that they're excited about. They released a single after announcing Alberto Bravin as the member of their crew now. So the single sounds really great. I believe it's still on YouTube somewhere. So that was really cool. There was some touring news, of course. They've already toured a couple dates with the new singer, and it seems to be going well. And the recent announcement that they're going to be on Cruise to the Edge 2024 was a big deal. And I'm sure a lot of people are being convinced to finally go on the cruise after hearing that Big Big Train are aboard. So really a great year for Big Big Train, even in the midst of a very tragic circumstance from last year with David Longdon passing away. It seems like they've really picked themselves up and have found a way to proceed forward in a very respectful and solid manner. So that was a big news item for me, since Big Big Train, I think, are one of the premier progressive rock acts that are going about now. So really wanted to put that into the news items here. Number 3 on my list is notable passings of Prague and related musicians that have happened throughout the year. I wanted to put this all sort of in one category here because there was a lot of notable figures in progressive rock and just in music in general that passed away this year, unfortunately. It started early in the year with Thor Peterson of Moron Police. Unfortunately passed away fairly young, so it was fairly shocking thing to hear about. Ian MacDonald, co-founder of King Crimson and Foreigner, also passed away earlier this year. Gary Brooker of Procol Harum, singer and pianist. Taylor Hawkins of the Foo Fighters, not necessarily Prague, but a really huge name in the music sphere, passed away. There were a lot of fitting tributes and big concerts in honor of him. Vangelis also passed away this year. Of course, Oscar-winning composer, and worked a lot with John Anderson of Yes, and I believe was even considered to become part of Yes at some point. So he definitely has ties in the Yes world. And then a huge name in the Yes world, Alan White, passed away, was one of the big ones this year. Very, very sad to see him pass. Just a legendary figure of the group Yes, and just had such a huge mark on their sound moving forward with some of those seminal albums that came out in the mid-70s and such. Nick Turner, Hawkwind co-founder, saxophonist, and multi-instrumentalist, passed away. Christine McVie of Fleetwood Mac recently passed away. Once again, not Prague necessarily, but we covered Fleetwood Mac in our classic album series, so it felt worth mentioning. And then Tracy Hitchings, landmark vocalist, just recently passed away as well. So those are some pretty notable people and figures in the music and Prague communities that was notable and worth mentioning and hopefully celebrating and honoring their lives and what they brought to the music scene and what they contributed. So that is my number 3. Number 2 Prog headline of the year, Prague and related music getting some recognition in the public space is what I wanted to focus on. A couple different examples here. We had Dream Theater winning a Grammy for Best Metal Performance for The Alien from their last album, A View from the Top of the World. Really great track, very proggy, very adventurous, and cool to see a mainstream award show like the Grammys giving a Prog album some recognition. So that was cool. There was a really cool speech that John Petrucci gave in honor accepting that award. Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill topped the charts this year. An older song that has, Kate Bush has some progressive leanings, I would say. So this is not totally progressive rock, but I think it was a notable thing that happened in the music space, that this really classic, cool, unique song became a big hit even in today's day and age because of Stranger Things Season 4 and its inclusion in that plot. And then Porcupine Tree scoring their highest ever UK chart position for their return with Closure/Continuation. So that album did really well and showcase that there's still some interest in prog-related material out there in the public space, not just in our little niche in this bubble here. So just wanted to mention that as item number 2 of some really cool prog accolades and related to more creative music is being accepted and being celebrated in the mainstream in some format. And then number 1, I thought this was fitting as the Prog headline number 1, that Genesis play their last show ever, and Peter Gabriel even attended in the audience at the London O2, but this was their last concert. They made it pretty clear Phil Collins' health is declining somewhat, and he's just not able to tour anymore. They're all getting up there in years, and it just made sense for this to be their final tour, this last Domino tour. And so this is, at least in this configuration, this will be the last time we see Genesis live. And Genesis, of course, is one of the seminal greatest prog bands that existed, so I felt like this was very fitting as the number 1 item. And even though Peter Gabriel didn't join the band, which a lot of people were somewhat hoping for, that we could get this classic lineup back in formation for this last show and bring in Steve Hackett as well and all that stuff. But even though that didn't come to fruition, it was cool that Peter Gabriel was in the audience and they're in spirit in some fashion, even if he didn't get up on stage. Of course, he has his own solo concerts coming up next year and hopefully a solo album to accompany it. So that's going to be big news moving forward into 2023. But I felt Genesis doing their last show was a pretty big monumental event, and it seemed like a pretty big show that a lot of people really loved, and they got a lot of love for that little tour that they did, focusing on their whole career. Of course, they focus a lot on their 80s hits and pop stuff that they did, but there's also a smattering of cool prog classics that they threw in the mix to give a really big picture retrospective of their career. So really cool to celebrate Prague in that fashion. So those are my Prog headlines, the top 5 in my opinion. There's a lot of other stuff, a lot of honorable mentions that I could have included. Just to quickly talk about a few: Cruise to the Edge 2024 being announced. I mentioned it a bit with the Big Train thing, but that was pretty big, at least for me, because I'm really excited to hopefully attend it. So that was fun. Steve Morse stepping away from Deep Purple was a pretty big news item. There's also Haken and all of the news surrounding them getting a new, return of their original keyboardist Pete Jones, releasing a single Nightingale, and they're moving forward with Fauna next year. There's also some notable releases from some legacy prog acts. Jethro Tull released the Zealot Gene. Benko, Italian prog, very classic, released their new album Orlando. Virgil and Steve Howe released Lunar Mist. Of course, Steve Howe, legendary guitarist, and his late son on that one. A lot of big tours happened this year. A lot of interesting new bands being signed to Inside Out Records that I thought to include. So a lot of cool things happening in the prog space. So it was a really good year with some great headlines, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the coverage on this channel of that. I plan to continue with that moving forward, and I'm excited to continue talking about it. So thank you guys for joining me on this episode. Please let me know in the comments if there's any big headlines I missed that you would like to mention, and just thank you guys for your support and for being a part of this journey on my channel. So bye everybody, enjoy the music.